The white satin of Verity Locke's glove had never trembled the way it trembled now, gripping the cold gilt rail of the gallery stair above the great hall of Carlton House. Below her, 300 candles threw their light across the marble, across the powdered shoulders, and the flashing jewels, and the slow, glittering river of the Tun as it flowed toward the dais. She had rehearsed her 3 steps and her curtsy for a fortnight in a borrowed gown that smelled of another woman's lavender. She had practiced the tilt of her chin until her neck ached. What she had not practiced was the sight of him, the man whose seal had turned the key in the lock of her father's ruin, standing not 10 feet from the regent himself, easy and untouched, a glass of wine warming in his ungloved hand. Gabriel Thorne, 6th Duke of Ashmore, did not look like a man who had destroyed a family. That was the first cruelty. He looked carved rather than born, tall and unhurried, his dark head bent to listen to something a laughing baroness murmured against his sleeve, and when he lifted his eyes, they moved across the room, the way frost moves across a window pane, cool and complete, and pausing for no one. He had ruined Renfield with the stroke of a pen, and he had come here to be admired for it. Verity's pulse struck once, hard, at the hollow of her throat, and her feet were already carrying her down the stair before her mind had given them leave. She should have felt the eyes finding her, the daughter of the disgraced Sir Edmund Locke, appearing where she had no business to appear. She heard the murmur begin behind her fan of whispers, the little intake of breath that always followed her now, wherever she went. She did not slow. The master of ceremonies said a name that was hers and yet no longer belonged to her, and the sea of silk parted, and she came to a halt upon the presentation carpet, before the raised chair where the Prince Regent sat swollen and gleaming in his orders and his ribbons, and the Duke of Ashmore turned, at last, and looked at her as though she were a portrait he had been told to appraise. "Your Highness," Verity said, and her voice did not shake, which astonished her, for every other part of her had turned to water. "I have come to thank the man who taught me what a great name is worth." And then, before the Regent could smile, before the Duke could speak, before her own good sense could catch the wrist that had already left her side, she crossed the small distance between them and struck the Duke of Ashmore across the face with the flat of her bare hand. The sound of it went up into the painted ceiling and came back down upon a silence so total that she could hear the candle flames breathe. Somewhere a woman gasped. Somewhere a glass met a tray with a small musical shiver. The red bloom of her palm was rising on the Duke's cheek, and his head had turned an inch with the blow, and stayed there, and his eyes had come back to her wide and black, and entirely, terribly awake. The frost gone out of them all at once, replaced by something she had no name for, and no wish to name. The Prince Regent came half out of his chair, his jowls trembling, his ringed finger flung out toward her like a blade. "Arrest her!" he roared. "Seize this creature! Arrest her, I say, and let her rot for laying hands upon a peer of this realm." The 2 guards at the foot of the dais were already moving, their halberds catching the light, and the crowd drew back in a rustling tide to give them room. And Verity lifted her chin and made herself tall and waited for the hands to close on her arms. She had struck him. She did not regret it. She would carry the memory of that sound into whatever cold room they meant to bury her in, and it would keep her warm. But the hands did not close. A voice, low and unhurried, and pitched to carry no farther than it needed, stopped the whole room where it stood. No. The Duke of Ashmore had raised one hand, not toward her, but toward the guards. And the guards, absurdly, obeyed him before they obeyed their prince. His cheek still bore the print of her fingers. His mouth had not hardened. When he turned to the Regent, his bow was exact and unbothered, the bow of a man who has never once in his life doubted the floor would hold him. "Your Highness is generous to defend my honor," he said, "but I must decline the loan of your gales. The lady has struck me, it is true. I find I would rather learn why than have her whipped for it." His gaze slid back to Verity, and for one endless moment, the whole gilded court fell away, and there was only the black attention of his eyes and the roaring of her own blood. "Grief wears many faces, madam. I have worn a few myself. You will do me the courtesy of naming your grievance, and I will do you the greater courtesy of hearing it." The Regent's face had gone the color of a plum. The Duke did not appear to notice. He held out his arm to Verity Locke. the arm of the man she had come to destroy, and every soul in the room leaned forward to see whether the disgraced girl would take it. She did not take it. She stared at the crook of his black sleeve as if it were a snare laid across her path. And it was. She understood that even then, to touch him was to become his creature, his charity, his sad little cautionary tale over 100 dinner tables. She kept her hands at her sides, where the cold air could reach the sting still throbbing in her palm, and she said, clear enough for the nearest ranks to carry it outward, I will not take the arm of the man who put my father in his grave. A sound went through the crowd, like wind through wheat. The Duke's dark brows drew a fraction closer, the only motion in his face. Then you believe I did, he said, very quietly, as though the two of them stood alone in a locked room, and not upon a stage before all of London. You believe it enough to hang for it. He lowered the arm. He looked at her, the way a man looks at a door he had walked past for years, and only now suspects leads somewhere. Madam, I have signed a great many papers in my life. I should like, before this night is out, to know which of them you think killed a man. You will come with me, not as a prisoner, upon my word as Ashmore, and you will tell me the whole of it. His Highness may keep his guards. I keep my own counsel, and tonight I mean to keep you within reach of it. And so it was that Verity Locke walked out of Carlton House on no one's arm at all, with the Duke of Ashmore half a pace behind her, and the eyes of the entire ton crawling over her back like ants, and stepped up into a black lacquered carriage with a silver crest upon the door, the very crest that had been stamped in wax upon the letter that took her home from her, not knowing where it would carry her, nor why her heart was beating, not with triumph now, but with something that felt frighteningly close to fear of the wrong kind. The carriage did not carry her to a magistrate. It carried her through the whole of a cold blue night and a grey dawn that broke over hedgerows silvered with frost, to Ravenhurst, the Duke's country seat, a great pale house of many windows set among black cedars, and a lake gone to pewter under the early light. Verity had slept perhaps an hour, upright in her corner, her spine refusing the cushions as if the cushions too belonged to him. He had ridden opposite her the whole night and asked her nothing. He had only watched the country pass, his gloved knuckle against his lips, that red mark long faded now, and once, when the road threw the carriage hard and her shoulder struck the frame, he had put out a hand to steady her and withdrawn it before it landed, as though he had remembered in time that he had no right. The housekeeper who met them at the door, a spare, straight woman named Mrs. Ballard, with a great ring of keys at her waist, did not blink at the arrival of a strange young woman in a crushed ball gown at 7 in the morning. She only looked once at the Duke, some question passing between them without a word, and then she took Verity's cold hand in both of her warm, dry ones and said, "You'll be wanting a fire and a broth and a bed, my dear," in that order, and Verity, who had steeled herself for chains and instead was being led up a wide, bright staircase to a room with primrose walls, felt the first crack open in the hard, clean wall of her hatred, and hated the crack more than she had ever hated him. She meant to escape, she told herself so, lying at last in the clean linen, with the fire ticking in the grate. She would rest a day, learn the house, and go, back to London, back to the small, cold rooms of her guardian, Cornelius Fenn, who had taken her in after Renfield fell, and never once let her forget the cost of her bread. But when she woke, it was to golden afternoon light, and a tray of things she had not eaten the like of in 2 years, and a folded note in a bold black hand upon the coverlet. "When you are strong enough to accuse me properly," it read, "I will be in the library. I dine at 8. Ashmore." No footman stood at her door. The window opened easily to her hand. He had left every road out of Ravenhurst standing wide, and somehow that was the surest lock of all. She went down to the library at 7:30, in a grey morning gown that Mrs. Ballard had produced from somewhere without a word about whose it had been. The Duke of Ashmore was standing at the tall windows with his back to her, watching the last of the light drain from the lake, and he did not turn as she entered, though she knew by the small stilling of his shoulders that he had heard the door. The room smelled of leather and beeswax and wood smoke. There were more books in it than she had seen in her life, and a great desk strewn with papers and ledgers, and above the mantel a portrait of a stern woman with the Duke's own dark eyes. "My mother," he said, still not turning. She would have liked you, I think. She had no patience for people who curtsied to power, and every patience for those who struck it. He turned then, and the firelight moved on the hard planes of his face, and Verity was startled to see that he looked tired, in a way that ballrooms never showed, a man carrying something up a long stair. Sit, Miss Locke, or stand, if it steadies you to keep the desk between us. I have found the letter you mean. It took me 4 hours. I have signed 100 like it, and read none of them. God forgive me. And that is the beginning of your grievance, and you shall have the whole truth of it, or none. Verity did not sit. Her fingers found the carved back of the chair and closed there, and the old fury rose up hot and welcome in her chest. My father, she said, Sir Edmund Locke, borrowed against Renfield in a bad season, as honest men do. The loan was bought up, quietly, all at once, and called in without warning, in the depth of winter, upon a technicality no gentleman would have pressed. The letter that turned us into the snow bore your seal, your grace, your name, your instruction that not a day's grace be granted. My mother took a chill upon the road we walked that night, and was in the ground by spring. My father lived another year, in rooms above a chandler's shop, and drank himself to the churchyard for shame. I was 19. I have spent the years since being grateful to a man who thinks I ought to have starved. Her voice cracked at last, on the final word, and she despised the sound of it, and she pressed her lips together hard until the trembling stopped. The Duke had gone very still through all of it. When she finished, he crossed to the desk and laid one long finger upon a sheet of paper turned to face her, and she saw, with a lurch, her own family's name in a clerk's neat hand, and at the foot of it, the black slash of a signature and the broken remains of a red wax seal. That is my seal, he said, and that is not my hand. He said it plainly, without heat, and let it stand in the air between them. I did not order Renfield foreclosed, Miss Locke. I did not know your father's name until you spoke it in the King's Own Hall. But my seal did this thing, and a man does not escape a wrong merely because another's hand held the pen. Someone in my house, or lately of it, reached into my affairs and signed murder in my name, and I mean to know who. I had thought, these 3 years, that the whispers against me were the ordinary spite of the tongue. I see now they were the smoke of a fire I never troubled to find. He lifted his eyes to hers, and there was something in them raw and unguarded that she had not expected and did not know how to arm herself against. You came to Carlton House to ruin me. It appears we have been ruined by the same hand. I should like your help to find it. Will you stay? She did not answer him that night, but she did not leave either. And when she lay awake in the primrose room, listening to the house settle around her, she found she could no longer summon the clean white shape of her hatred entire. Some corner of it had gone soft and treacherous, and would not harden again, however she turned it in the dark. The days at Ravenhurst folded into a rhythm she had not asked for, and could not seem to refuse. She woke to birdsong and honest food. She walked the frost-stiff gardens where the last roses hung brown and brave upon their stems. She sat, at first across the great desk, and then, by degrees, beside it, as she and the Duke went through the ledgers of 3 years, page by yellowed page, hunting the small false entries where money had bled quietly out of the estate and into someone's private pocket. She learned the way he worked, the way he pushed his dark hair back with an ink-stained hand when a column would not answer, the way he set aside the finest chair for her and took the hard one for himself, without seeming to notice he had done it. The way the servants of Ravenhurst spoke his name. They did not fear him. That undid her more than anything. The stable boy he had schooled in his letters, the widowed cook whose son he had bought out of a press gang, Mrs. Ballard, who scolded him for missing his dinner as though he were a great overgrown child and not a duke of the realm. This was not the man the ton feared. This was a man who had let the world believe him cold, because it was easier than being known. You might tell them, Verity said one evening, when a letter from London had left him grim and silent at the window. The ton. You might tell them the seal was forged. You need not carry their contempt. He was quiet a long moment. Beyond the glass, the lake lay black, and the first stars pricked the cold. And say what? He answered at last. That a duke cannot keep his own seal safe? that my house is so ill-governed a clerk may sign death in my name, and I not know it for 3 years. No, Miss Locke. A man's honour is not a coat he may take off when the rain comes. I would rather be thought cruel than careless. The cruel are feared, the careless are devoured. He turned, and his gaze found her across the firelit room, and it lingered, and something in the air between them drew tight as a plucked string. Besides, he said, more softly, had I cleared my name a year ago, you would never have struck me, and I find I cannot bring myself to wish that hour undone. Verity's breath caught somewhere below her collarbone and would not come free. She looked at the ink on his fingers, and the tired line of his jaw, and the space of 3 feet of Turkey carpet between his chair and hers, and it seemed to her the most dangerous distance in England, a distance a woman might cross in 2 steps and never find her way back across again. She rose, too quickly, and bade him good night, and felt his eyes upon her the whole length of the room, and did not look back, because she did not trust what her face would do if she did. The nights grew colder, and the ledgers gave up their secret one grey afternoon in December. It was Verity who found it, a chain of small sums, quarter by quarter, threaded out of the Ravenhurst rents and into the accounts of a shipping concern in Bristol, and the shipping concern owned, 3 hands removed, by a single man, Silas Crenshaw, the Duke's own steward these 15 years, the soft-spoken grey man who kept the seal press in a locked drawer to which only he and his master held the key. And beside the earliest of those sums, in the margin, a clerk had noted the name of the London agent who had bought up and called in a certain country loan on Crenshaw's quiet instruction, and the name was one Verity knew as well as her own: Cornelius Fenn, her guardian, the man who had taken in the orphaned daughter of the family he had helped to ruin, and fed her on scraps, and reminded her nightly of his charity, and watched her hate the wrong man for 3 long years. She did not weep. She sat with the ledger open on her knees while the short day died in the window, and the whole shape of her ruin turned itself over and showed her its underside, and she understood at last that the hand that turned the key had been sitting across the breakfast table from her all along, buttering his bread. When the Duke came in and saw her face, he crossed the room in 3 strides and went down on one knee beside her chair, a Duke kneeling, and took the ledger gently from her cold hands and read it, and she watched the fury gather in him like a storm banking up behind a hill, and she watched him master it, for her sake, so that his stillness should not frighten her. "They used us both," she said, and her voice came out very small. "He took me in so that he might watch, so that if ever the truth stirred, he should have me to hand, grateful and quiet and blaming you." She lifted her eyes to his, and they were near enough now that she could see the fine dark lashes and the pulse beating at his temple. "I struck you before the king, and it was Fenn's hand on my father's throat all along. You struck the man you had been given to strike," the Duke said. His voice had dropped very low. His hand had come up, hovering, and then, slowly, as if he were gentling something that might bolt, he laid it over hers where it gripped the arm of the chair, ungloved, his bare warm palm against her cold bare fingers, the first true touch to pass between them, and neither of them breathed. "And I would take that blow 100 times, Verity, before I would give up the road it set me on. Do you hear me?" His thumb moved, once, across her knuckles. "I have been 3 years alone in this house, believing the world hated me justly. You walked into the King's Hall and hated me wrongly, and it is the truest thing that has happened to me in all that time." She should have drawn her hand away. Every rule she had ever been taught stood up in her at once and commanded it, but his palm was warm, and his eyes were on her mouth, and the fire was low, and the whole cruel, careful world of rank and ruin had shrunk to the 6 inches of air between them, and she did not draw her hand away, and he did not close the last of the distance, and they stayed so, poised on the trembling edge of a thing neither of them had the courage yet to name, until the door opened, and Ballard came in with the candles, and the moment shattered like ice underfoot. The reckoning came faster than either of them wished, for Silas Crenshaw was no fool, and a steward who has robbed his master for a decade keeps one ear always to the ground, and within the week word reached Ravenhurst that Crenshaw had gone up to London in haste, and that Cornelius Fenn had been seen calling upon certain men of influence, and that a new whisper was running through the drawing rooms of the Tun, that the Duke of Ashmore had carried off the Locke girl to his country house and kept her there against all decency, and that the poor deranged creature had accused him at court because he had used her cruelly. The truth had frightened the guilty, and the guilty, as the guilty always do, had reached for the oldest weapon of all. They would ruin Verity Locke a second time, and use her ruin to bury the Duke beside her, before ever the ledger could be laid before a magistrate. "There is a way to answer it," the Duke said. They were walking the long gallery at Ravenhurst, the winter light lying pale across the parquet, and he had been silent so long, she had thought he meant not to speak at all. "One way only, and it asks a great deal of you, and I would sooner cut off my hand than press it upon you as a bargain." He stopped and turned to face her, and for the first time since Carlton House, the easy command was gone from him entirely, and what stood in its place was only a man, uncertain, holding his heart out in his open hand. "Lady Cordelia Whitmore's family has offered me her and her £40,000, and the clean slate her name would buy me. The whole of the Tun expects me to take it and be respectable again. I have refused. I refused a week ago, in the library, the night your hand was cold under mine, though I did not tell you so, because I did not yet know whether you could ever look at me without seeing the man who ruined your house." He drew a breath that she saw move the whole of him. "I do not want Lady Cordelia's £40,000. I want to stand up before the same court that bade for your arrest, and clear your father's name, and give you back Renfield stone by stone. And then, if you will have a graceless brute who let the world call him a monster for 3 years, rather than admit he had been robbed, I want to give you my name as well. I love you, Verity. I have loved you since the moment you struck me and did not look away." The gallery was very quiet. Far off in the house a clock was striking, and the cold light lay on his face, and Verity Locke stood before the man she had come to London to destroy, and found that her whole heart had turned itself over in her breast, like a key in a lock. "You are asking," she managed, "whether I can love the seal that ruined my father. I am asking," he said, "whether you can love the man behind it. They are not the same. You taught me that." She did not answer him with words. She crossed the last of the distance herself, as she had known, that first night in the library, that a woman might cross it and never come back, and she lifted her bare hand, the same hand that had struck him before the king, and laid it flat against his cheek, where the red bloom had risen weeks ago, gently now, and felt him turn his face into her palm and close his eyes, as though a great weight had finally been set down. And when he bent his dark head and kissed her, slow and careful and asking, in the pale winter light of the long gallery, she kissed him back with 3 years of grief and a lifetime of hope, and it was the first warm thing she had done since the night the snow took her home away. They did not have the luxury of a long private happiness. The Tun had lit its fire and meant to see it burn, and so within the fortnight, the Duke of Ashmore did a thing no one at Carlton House had thought him capable of. He asked leave to address the court, and he brought Verity Locke back into the very hall where she had struck him, on his arm this time, in a gown of deep midnight silk, with her mother's small locket at her throat, the one thing Fen had never found to sell. The Prince Regent, who did not love the Duke, but loved a spectacle better than his dinner, granted it, and the great room filled to the walls, and the whispers ran hot as fever, and Cornelius Fenn stood among the crowd in his good black coat, with his hands folded and his face composed, certain he had won. The Duke did not raise his voice. He never did. He stood upon the presentation carpet with Verity's hand steady in his, and he laid before the court the ledgers of Ravenhurst, and the false accounts, and the Bristol shipping concern, and the letters in Silas Crenshaw's own hand, and the forged seal upon the letter that had turned a baronet's family into the winter snow. He named Crenshaw, who had fled that morning and been taken upon the Bristol road with a valise of banknotes. And then, in the ringing silence, he turned toward the black-coated man in the crowd and named Cornelius Fenn, named him for the agent who had bought the loan and called it in, named him for the guardian who had sheltered his victim's daughter to keep her grateful and blind, named him before the Prince Regent and the assembled peerage of England as the true and secret author of the fall of the House of Locke. "This woman," the Duke said, and now at last his voice did rise, filling the painted hall to its gilded ceiling. struck me in this room, because she had been taught, with great care and long patience, to lay her ruin at the wrong man's feet. She was wrong. I forgive her freely, for I have never in my life been so honored as by that blow. But the man who taught her, the man who murdered her father with a pen and then fed her his charity to keep her quiet, stands among you now in a coat he bought with her inheritance. Your Highness called for an arrest that first night. I decline it still. For the lady, I renew it with all my heart. For him, the guards moved, and this time the Duke did not stay their hands. Cornelius Fenn's composed face came apart all at once, the way rotten cloth tears, and he was still protesting his innocence in a high, cracked voice as they led him from the hall. And Verity Locke stood in the center of the storm she had begun, with her father's name rising clean at last from the mire, and felt the Duke's grip tighten warm and sure around her fingers, and did not look at the departing villain at all. She looked at Gabriel, and he, before the Prince Regent and the whole of the Tun, and all the glittering cruelty that had devoured her family and driven her to strike a stranger's face, he raised her bare hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, slow and unhurried and entirely without shame, and let the whole of London see exactly whom the Duke of Ashmore had chosen. They were married in the spring, in the little grey church at the edge of the Ravenhurst lands, with the cedars in new needle and the lake gone silver blue under a soft sky. There was no crush of the Tun. There was Mrs. Ballard weeping frankly into her handkerchief, and the stable boy in a coat too big for him, and the cook, and the widow, and a scatter of country neighbours who had never once believed the whispers. Verity wore her mother's locket, and a gown the colour of the first primroses that had bloomed against her bedroom wall. And when the Duke turned to her at the altar rail, he was smiling, really smiling, the frost gone out of him for good, and she thought that no one who had only ever seen him in a ballroom would have known him at all. The seasons turned over Ravenhurst, and the wound that had brought them together healed slowly into the quiet strength of a joined life. He rebuilt Renfield, as he had promised, stone upon patient stone, and gave it back to her, not as a duke's gift, but as her own, the deeds in her name alone. And she filled its rooms again with light and music, and the small, ordinary sounds a house makes when it is loved. She learned the running of the estate at his side, and was better at the ledgers than he had ever been, which he confessed with great cheerfulness to anyone who would listen. In the second year, there was a daughter with her mother's dark hair, and her father's still, watchful eyes, and the Duke of Ashmore, who had once let the whole of England believe him cold, was found more than once asleep in a chair by the nursery fire, with the child on his chest and an unread dispatch box on the floor beside him. The Tun forgot, in time, that it had ever hissed her name. The Tun always forgets, but Verity did not forget, and neither did he. And on the anniversary of a certain night at Carlton House, they raised a quiet glass to the strangest blessing either had ever been given, a blow struck in grief that had opened a door neither of them had known was there. Years on a golden morning with the mist just lifting off the Renfield lawns, Verity stood at a window with a cup of chocolate cooling in her hands and watched her husband walk the frosted grass below, their daughter's small mittened hand tucked into his bare one. The two of them bent over some great and serious matter of a robin's nest or a fallen conker. He was greyer now at the temple, and slower, and he laughed more easily than any man she had known in the cruel, bright rooms of her girlhood. As if he felt her watching, he lifted his head and found her at the glass, and raised the child's hand and his own together in a small salute, and Verity pressed her palm flat to the cold pane in answer. The same hand, she thought, that had once flown out in a candle-lit hall and changed the whole course of her life, resting now warm and open against the morning. She had gone to that court to strike a monster, and had struck, instead, the first true door of her own happiness. She had only had the courage to walk through it because he had left it standing open. And so, I will leave you here, by this frosted window, with the mist lifting gold over the lawns and a bare hand pressed to the glass. But I cannot help wondering about you, my dear listener, warm and quiet wherever you are. If you had walked into that glittering, cruel court believing you knew exactly who had wronged you, if you had been so certain and so wrong, would you have found the courage, as Verity did, to lay down your anger and let yourself be surprised by love? Would you have taken the arm or refused it? Tell me in the comments below. I read every one of them by the fire, and I should so love to know your heart. And if this story warmed you even a little, stay with me, subscribe, and settle in, and let us open the next tale together. For there is always another door standing quietly open, and always someone brave enough to walk through it.